The Frostborn Curse. Yoan Vale had always feared the cold, but the cold had always loved her. The people of Hollowmere whispered of the Frostborn King, the one who would return to take a bride beneath the first winter moon. She had laughed at their stories until the lake froze solid overnight. Until the wind carried a name she didn't recognize but somehow knew. And then she saw him standing at the center of the storm, his silver eyes gleaming like ice. "You were promised to me," he murmured, his voice low, unshaken. And winter never forgets its debts. Chapter 1. Echoes of Hollowmere. The wind howled a mournful dirge through the skeletal branches of the ancient oaks surrounding Hollowmere, a sound Yoan Vale had grown accustomed to, yet never truly embraced. At 57, she felt the chill of the approaching winter not just in the air, but deep in her bones, a constant, unwelcome companion. Hollowmere, nestled in a valley perpetually shrouded in mist, was a place where seasons bled into each other, the warmth of summer a fleeting memory, the icy grip of winter an ever-present threat. Yoan ran a hand over the worn, wooden counter of her small apothecary, the Whispering Willow, a name that seemed more hopeful than accurate these days. The shelves were lined with jars of dried herbs, colorful powders, and tinctures, each meticulously labeled in her neat, spidery handwriting. The scent of lavender and rosemary, usually comforting, today felt heavy, almost oppressive. Business had been slow. The villagers, already wary of outsiders, had grown even more withdrawn as the days shortened and the nights grew colder. She glanced at her reflection in the dusty window pane. Her face, framed by strands of silver-streaked, auburn hair, held a weariness that went beyond the years. Deep-set, hazel eyes, once vibrant with life, now seemed clouded with a perpetual sorrow, a reflection of the grief she had carried since losing Thomas, her husband, 5 years ago. The lines etched around her mouth spoke of unspoken words, of a life lived in quiet resilience. Her hands, though still nimble, bore the faint scars of countless harvests, a testament to her connection to the earth, to the healing power of nature she so fiercely believed in. A sudden gust of wind rattled the shop's old wooden door, causing the small bell above it to chime discordantly. Yoan turned, expecting a customer, but the street outside remained deserted, the cobblestones glistening under the weak, watery sunlight. She shivered, pulling her thick, woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. It wasn't just the cold. A strange unease had settled over her in the past few weeks, a prickling at the back of her neck, a sense of being watched. She tried to dismiss it as the usual pre-winter anxieties. The villagers were always more superstitious this time of year, their tales of the Frostborn King growing more elaborate with each passing storm. Yoan, a woman of science and reason, had always scoffed at such folklore. The Frostborn King, a mythical being said to rule the realm of winter, was nothing more than a story to frighten children, a way to explain the harshness of the season. Yet, the whispers had been particularly insistent this year. Old Maggie, the village's self-proclaimed seer, had stopped Yoan in the market square just yesterday, her milky eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "He's coming, Owen," she had croaked, her voice raspy with age. "The Frostborn King. He's coming for his bride." Yoan had politely brushed off the old woman's ramblings, but Maggie's words had lingered, unsettling her more than she cared to admit. The legend spoke of a curse, a promise made centuries ago, a bride to be taken every 100 years to appease the King of Winter and ensure the survival of Hollowmere. It was a ridiculous notion, of course. But the unusual cold that had settled over the valley, the eerie silence that had fallen over the usually bustling village, the strange dreams that had begun to plague her sleep, it all felt different. She forced herself to focus on the present, on the practical. She needed to prepare a poultice for Mrs. Henderson's rheumatism, a simple task that usually brought her a sense of calm. But as she reached for the dried comfrey, her hand trembled. She knocked over a small vial of belladonna, the dark liquid spilling across the counter like a stain of foreboding. "Damn it," she muttered, her voice sounding strained even to her own ears. She quickly cleaned up the spill, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. The dreams had been the worst. Vivid, unsettling visions of a vast, frozen landscape, of a figure cloaked in white, his face obscured by shadow, his eyes like chips of glacial ice, piercing and cold. He never spoke, but she felt his presence, a heavy weight pressing down on her, a sense of inescapable destiny. She had tried to rationalize them, to attribute them to stress, to the impending winter, to the loneliness that had become her constant companion. But deep down, a part of her, a primal, instinctual part, felt a growing dread, a sense of something inevitable approaching. As dusk began to creep in, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray, Eowyn decided to close the shop early. She locked the door, the heavy bolt sliding into place with a resounding thud. The sound, usually comforting, tonight felt like the ceiling of a tomb. She walked home, her footsteps echoing on the empty cobblestone streets. The wind whipped around her, carrying the scent of snow and something else, something ancient and wild, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She glanced up at the sky, searching for the moon, but it was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. Reaching her small cottage at the edge of the village, she fumbled with the key, her hands shaking. The cottage, once a haven of warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty, a constant reminder of all she had lost. She lit a fire in the hearth, the flames struggling to take hold against the damp chill that permeated the stone walls. As she sat by the fire, sipping a cup of chamomile tea, she tried to focus on the familiar comforts of her home. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, the soft purr of her old ginger cat, Thomas named, with a touch of bittersweet humor, after her late husband, curled up on the rug. But the unease remained, a knot of tension in her stomach that refused to unravel. She looked out the window, at the swirling mist that had enveloped the village, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. It felt as if Hollowmere was holding its breath, waiting for something. Or someone. A shiver ran down her spine, and she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that the whispers were true. The Frostborn King was coming.
But why?
And why did the thought fill her with a strange mixture of terror and anticipation? The wind howled again, closer this time, and Eowyn swore she heard a voice, faint and far away, whispering a name she didn't recognize, yet somehow knew. A name that felt both alien and intimately familiar. A name that chilled her to the very core. Chapter 2. The Frozen Lake. The morning dawned gray and heavy, the air thick with a preternatural stillness. Eowyn had barely slept, tossed and turned by the recurring nightmares, the image of the ice-eyed figure haunting her waking moments. She rose, feeling the weight of an unspoken dread pressing down on her, a sense of foreboding that had settled deep in her bones. She dressed quickly, pulling on her warmest woolens, her movements stiff and mechanical. The fire in the hearth had long since died, leaving the cottage shrouded in a damp chill. Thomas, the cat, rubbed against her legs, purring loudly, as if sensing her unease. She bent down to stroke his soft fur, finding a small measure of comfort in his familiar presence. "It's just the weather, old boy," she murmured, her voice sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Just the winter blues."
But she knew it was more than that.
The whispers of the village, the strange dreams, the unsettling cold, it all pointed to something far more ominous. She had a task to complete which took her mind out of things briefly. Mrs. Henderson was expecting Eowyn for a mid-morning checkup, and despite the inner turmoil that swirled within her, Eowyn's sense of duty remained steadfast. As Eowyn stepped outside, she was struck by the unnatural silence. The usual sounds of village life, the clatter of carts, the chatter of neighbors, the distant ringing of the blacksmith's hammer were absent, replaced by an eerie quiet that felt heavy and oppressive. The mist that usually clung to the valley had thickened, obscuring everything beyond a few feet, creating a sense of isolation, of being cut off from the rest of the world. She made her way towards the village center, her footsteps echoing on the empty cobblestone streets. The air was bitterly cold, biting at her exposed skin, a cold that felt different, deeper than any she had ever experienced. She noticed that the puddles in the road were frozen solid, a thick layer of ice covering their surfaces, a phenomenon unheard of this early in the season. As she neared the village square, she saw a small group of villagers huddled together, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. Curiosity? Awe? She couldn't quite decipher it. They were staring towards the lake, the large body of water that bordered the village, a source of life and sustenance for Hollowmere. Ioan approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. As she drew closer, she gasped. The lake, usually a shimmering expanse of blue, was completely frozen over. A solid sheet of ice, thick and opaque, stretched as far as the eye could see, reflecting the gray sky like a giant, frozen mirror. It was impossible. The lake never froze this early, not even in the harshest winters. It was a deep lake, fed by underground springs, its waters always moving, always alive. Yet here it was, frozen solid, a testament to a power that defied the natural order. The villagers murmured amongst themselves, their voices hushed and reverent. "The Frostborn King," she heard one of them whisper. "He's here." Ioan felt a chill run down her spine, a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. She looked out at the frozen lake, at the unnatural stillness of the scene, and a sense of dread washed over her, a feeling of inevitability, of a destiny she could no longer deny. Old Maggie, standing at the edge of the group, turned to Ioan, her milky eyes gleaming with an unsettling light. "I told you," she croaked, her voice barely a whisper. "He's come for his bride." Ioan wanted to scoff, to dismiss the old woman's words as the ramblings of a superstitious mind. But she couldn't. The evidence was before her, undeniable and terrifying. The frozen lake, the unnatural cold, the whispers of the wind, it all pointed to the truth of the legend, to the reality of the Frostborn King. She felt a strange pull towards the lake, a morbid curiosity, a desire to see, to understand. She took a step forward, then another, her feet moving as if guided by an unseen force. The villagers parted to let her pass, their eyes following her every move. As she reached the edge of the lake, she saw him. He was standing in the center of the frozen expanse, a figure of ethereal beauty and terrifying power. He was tall and slender, his form cloaked in a shimmering white robe that seemed to blend with the surrounding ice and snow. His hair was the color of freshly fallen snow, cascading down his shoulders like a frozen waterfall. His skin was pale, almost translucent, as if carved from ice itself. But it was his eyes that captivated her, that held her frozen in place. They were the color of glacial ice, a piercing, crystalline blue that seemed to see through her, to strip away her defenses, to lay bare her soul. They held a coldness that was both terrifying and strangely alluring. He didn't move, didn't speak, but she felt his presence, a powerful force that radiated from him, a presence that seemed to fill the very air she breathed. She felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination, of dread and desire. He raised a hand, a slow, deliberate gesture, and beckoned her forward. She wanted to resist, to turn and run, to flee from this terrifying vision. But her feet seemed rooted to the spot, her will paralyzed by his power. She took a hesitant step onto the ice, the frozen surface groaning beneath her weight. She expected to feel the biting cold, to shiver uncontrollably. But instead, a strange warmth began to spread through her, a warmth that emanated from him, from his presence, from his gaze. Another step, and another. She was walking towards him, drawn by an invisible force, a force that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The wind whipped around her, carrying the scent of snow and something else, something ancient and wild, something that resonated deep within her soul. And then she heard it, clear as a bell, the voice from her dreams, his voice, low and resonant, speaking a single word, a word that echoed across the frozen lake, a word that sealed her fate.
Ioan.
It wasn't a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement, the claiming of a debt long overdue. Chapter 3. A name on the wind. His voice, A low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very ice beneath her feet sent a shiver down Eowyn's spine, a shiver that was not entirely unpleasant. It was a voice that resonated with power, with an ancient, untamed energy that both terrified and intrigued her. It was the voice from her dreams, the voice that had haunted her waking moments, the voice that now called her name with a certainty that sent a tremor of fear through her heart.
Eowyn.
The name, spoken with such possessiveness, such finality, echoed in her mind, silencing the frantic whispers of doubt and fear that had been swirling within her. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat, her gaze locked on his. He was closer now, close enough for her to see the intricate details of his face, the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the faint lines around his eyes that hinted at an age far beyond his youthful appearance. His skin, pale as moonlight on snow, seemed to emit a faint, ethereal glow. He didn't smile, but there was a softening in his gaze, a hint of something in those glacial blue eyes. Was it curiosity? Interest? Or something far more profound, something that resonated with the strange, unfamiliar longing that had begun to stir within her? She wanted to speak, to demand answers, to protest her fate, to scream at the injustice of it all. But the words caught in her throat, frozen by the intensity of his gaze, by the sheer power that radiated from him. She felt as if she were caught in a dream, a surreal, terrifying dream from which she couldn't awaken. "You know why I am here," he said, his voice still low, but now carrying a hint of what was it? Melancholy? Resignation? It was hard to tell, his emotions as veiled and mysterious as the frozen landscape that surrounded them. Eowyn finally found her voice, though it trembled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "The legend," she stammered, her words sounding weak and uncertain even to her own ears. "The Frostborn King, the bride," he nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "The debt must be paid. Hollowmere has prospered under my protection for centuries. Now it is time for the price to be exacted." His words, though spoken calmly, struck her like a physical blow. Protection? Price? She had always dismissed the legend as folklore, as a superstitious tale to explain the harshness of winter. But now, standing before him, seeing the power that emanated from him, she knew it was real. He was real. And she was the price. "But why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I'm not a young maiden. I'm an old woman, a widow." "Surely there are others." He tilted his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her silver-streaked hair, the lines of age and sorrow etched on her face, the worn, woolen clothes that spoke of a life lived in simplicity and hardship. "Age is irrelevant," he said, his voice devoid of any trace of mockery or disdain. "It is not beauty, nor youth, that I seek. It is a connection, a resonance, a soul that can withstand the cold." His words were cryptic, confusing. What did he mean by connection? Resonance? And what did her ability to withstand the cold have to do with anything? She had always hated the cold, had always sought warmth and comfort. He took a step closer, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator stalking its prey. She wanted to retreat, to run, to escape the intensity of his gaze, the overwhelming power that seemed to envelop her. But her feet remained rooted to the spot, her will seemingly subservient to his. "You were promised to me," he murmured, his voice now a mere breath against her ear, sending a shiver of both fear and something else down her spine. "Long ago, before you were even born, a pact was made, an oath sworn. Winter never forgets its debts." He reached out a hand, his long, slender fingers brushing against her cheek. She flinched at his touch, expecting the icy coldness of his skin. But instead, a surprising warmth radiated from his fingertips, a warmth that spread through her like a wildfire, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in her bones. It was a confusing, unsettling sensation. How could someone who embodied the very essence of winter, who commanded the power of ice and snow, emanate such warmth? It defied logic, defied reason. Yet there it was undeniable and intoxicating. "Don't be afraid, Eowyn," he said, his voice softening, losing some of its harsh edge. I will not harm you. I am not a monster, as the tales would have you believe. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, any hint of malice. But she found only a profound sadness, a deep-seated loneliness that mirrored her own. It was a strange, unexpected connection, a shared sense of isolation that resonated deep within her soul. What happens now? She asked, her voice still trembling, but now with a hint of curiosity? Resignation? She wasn't sure. He lowered his hand, the warmth receding, leaving her feelings strangely bereft. You will come with me, he said, his voice firm, but not unkind. To my kingdom, to the realm of winter. You will be my queen. The words struck her like a thunderbolt. His queen? The queen of winter? It was an absurd, impossible notion. She was a simple apothecary, a woman of the earth, a healer. She belonged in Hollowmere, amongst the familiar sights and sounds of her village, amongst the people she had known all her life. But as she looked at him, at the power and the sadness in his eyes, at the frozen landscape that stretched out before them, she knew there was no escape. She was bound to him, by a promise made long ago, by a destiny she could no longer deny. The wind whispered her name again, this time with a sense of finality, of inevitability. And Eowyn Vale, the woman who had always feared the cold, knew that her life had changed forever. The wind seemed to carry her decision, to bear it into the vast frozen wastes beyond the lake. She would go. Chapter 4. The King of Winter's Court. The journey was unlike anything Eowyn could have imagined. One moment she was standing on the frozen lake, the wind whipping her hair around her face. The next she was enveloped in a swirling vortex of snow and ice, a sensation of weightlessness, of being transported through time and space. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the impact, but there was none. When she opened them again, she found herself standing in a vast, breathtaking hall, a palace sculpted entirely from ice. Towering columns of shimmering blue ice reached towards a vaulted ceiling that glittered with 1,000 embedded crystals, reflecting the light like a constellation of stars. Intricate carvings adorned the walls, depicting scenes of frozen landscapes, mythical creatures, and figures that seemed to dance within the ice itself. The air was cold, yet not unpleasantly so. It was a crisp, clean cold, invigorating rather than biting, a cold that seemed to purify rather than punish. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint, ethereal music that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the palace, a haunting melody that resonated deep within her soul. She turned to find the Frostborn King standing beside her, his white robe now replaced by a more regal attire, a tunic of deep blue, embroidered with silver thread that shimmered like frost, a cloak of white fur draped over his shoulders. He looked even more imposing in this setting, his presence filling the vast hall, his power palpable and undeniable. "Welcome to Winter's Hold, Eowyn," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "My home. And now yours." She looked around, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The sheer scale of the palace, the artistry of its construction, the ethereal beauty of its surroundings, it was overwhelming. She had never seen anything like it, had never imagined such a place could exist. "It's extraordinary," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It is a place of ancient power, of magic woven into the very fabric of its being. A place where winter reigns eternal." He gestured for her to follow him, and she did, her footsteps silent on the smooth, icy floor. He led her through a series of interconnected halls and chambers, each more breathtaking than the last. She saw vast libraries filled with ancient tomes bound in ice, shimmering gardens where frozen flowers bloomed in a riot of colors, and grand ballrooms where crystal chandeliers hung like giant icicles. The palace was not empty. She saw figures moving through the halls, ethereal beings clad in shimmering white and silver, their movements fluid and graceful, their faces serene and otherworldly. They seemed to glide rather than walk, their presence adding to the surreal, dreamlike quality of the place. They did not speak, but they acknowledged Eowyn with a slight nod of their heads, their eyes, like the king's, a piercing, crystalline blue. She felt a sense of not exactly welcome, but acceptance, a recognition of her place in this strange, new world. He led her to a smaller chamber, a private suite that overlooked a vast, frozen landscape. The room was furnished with exquisite elegance, a large bed draped with furs, a fireplace where a fire of blue flames crackled merrily, casting a warm, ethereal glow. "These will be your chambers," he said, his voice softening. "I hope you will find them comfortable." She looked around, her eyes taking in the luxurious surroundings. It was a far cry from her small, humble cottage in Hollowmere. Yet, despite the opulence, she felt a pang of longing for her home, for the familiar comforts of her old life. "Thank you," she said, her voice still hesitant. "It's beautiful." He studied her for a moment, his gaze intense and searching. "You are still afraid," he said, his voice a statement, not a question. She couldn't deny it. The fear was still there, a knot of tension in her stomach, a constant reminder of the unfamiliar, the unknown. But it was mingled with other emotions now, a growing curiosity, a strange fascination, and a flicker of something else, something she couldn't quite define. I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Why me? What do you want from me?" He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "I told you," he said, his voice laced with a hint of weariness. "It is a debt, a promise. But it is also more than that." He walked towards the window, his gaze fixed on the frozen landscape beyond. "My kingdom has been isolated for too long," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The magic is fading, the connection to the mortal realm weakening. I need a bridge. Someone who can understand both worlds, someone who can help me restore the balance." His words were cryptic, confusing. What did he mean by balance? What connection was he talking about? And how could she, a simple apothecary, possibly help him? "I don't understand," she repeated, her voice laced with frustration. He turned to face her, his eyes locking with hers. "You will," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "In time, you will understand. But for now, rest. You have had a long journey." He gestured towards the bed, and she realized how tired she was. The journey, the shock, the overwhelming strangeness of it all, it had taken its toll. She nodded, her eyelids feeling heavy. She walked towards the bed, sinking into the soft furs, the warmth enveloping her like a comforting embrace. She expected to lie awake, her mind racing with 1,000 questions, 1,000 fears. But exhaustion claimed her swiftly, pulling her down into a deep, dreamless sleep. As she slept, the king watched over her, his gaze lingering on her face, his expression unreadable. He had waited centuries for this moment, for the arrival of his promised bride, for the chance to restore his kingdom to its former glory. But as he looked at her vulnerability, at the strength that he sensed beneath her fear, he felt a stirring of something he had not expected, something he had not felt in centuries. A flicker of warmth, a hint of hope, and a growing fear that he might lose her before she even had a chance to understand the true nature of the bond that tied them together. He traced a pattern onto the frosty window pane, a symbol, the symbol of his house. And he whispered a silent promise, a vow to protect her, to guide her, to help her discover the power that lay dormant within her, the power that could save both their worlds. Chapter 5. Promised in Shadow. Eowyn awoke to the soft crackling of the blue flames in the fireplace, the gentle warmth radiating through the room, chasing away the lingering chill of sleep. She sat up, pushing the heavy furs aside, her mind still foggy from the abrupt transition from her familiar world to this ethereal realm of ice and snow. The events of the previous day felt like a distant, surreal dream. The frozen lake, the villagers' whispers, the Frostborn King's arrival, the journey to this impossible palace, it all seemed too fantastical to be real. Yet, here she was, surrounded by the tangible evidence of this strange, new reality. She looked around the chamber, her eyes taking in the intricate details of the ice-carved furniture, the shimmering tapestries that adorned the walls, the breathtaking view of the frozen landscape beyond the window. It was a room fit for a queen of winter. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a mixture of fear and a strange, unexpected thrill. She rose from the bed, her bare feet sinking into the plush fur rug that covered the floor. She walked towards the window, drawn by the mesmerizing view of the frozen world outside. The sky was a pale, ethereal blue, the sun a distant, shimmering orb that cast a faint, otherworldly glow over the landscape. She saw vast, snow-covered plains stretching as far as the eye could see, punctuated by towering ice formations that glittered like giant crystals. She saw frozen rivers winding their way through the landscape, frozen waterfalls cascading down icy cliffs, and forests of frost-covered trees that shimmered like silver. It was a world of breathtaking beauty, of pristine, untouched wilderness, of a silence so profound it felt almost sacred. It was a world that both terrified and captivated her, a world that resonated with a power she could feel but not yet understand. As she stood there, lost in contemplation, she heard a soft knock on the door. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. "Come in," she said, her voice sounding surprisingly steady, despite the tremor of fear that ran through her. The door opened, and the Frostborn King entered, his presence filling the room, his power palpable and undeniable. He was dressed in a different attire today, a tunic of deep green, embroidered with silver leaves, a cloak of dark brown fur draped over his shoulders. He looked less imposing than he had yesterday, more human. "Good morning, Yoan," he said, his voice low and resonant. "I trust you slept well." "Yes, thank you," she replied, her voice still hesitant. "It's quite a view." He nodded, his gaze following hers towards the window. "It is a world of stark beauty, of untamed power. A world that has been my home for centuries." He paused, his eyes turning back to her, his gaze intense and searching. "I know you have many questions," he said, his voice softening, "and I will answer them in time.
But first, I want to show you something."
He gestured for her to follow him, and she did, her curiosity outweighing her apprehension. He led her out of the chamber and through a series of winding corridors, the silence broken only by the faint, ethereal music that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the palace. They reached a large, circular chamber, its walls lined with ancient tapestries that depicted scenes of a long-forgotten history. In the center of the room stood a large pedestal, upon which rested a single object, a silver ring. The ring was simple in design, a plain band of polished silver, but it emanated a faint, ethereal glow, a subtle energy that made the hairs on the back of Eowyn's neck stand on end. "This," the king said, his voice hushed and reverent, "is the key to your understanding. The key to the promise that binds us together." He picked up the ring, his long, slender fingers tracing its smooth surface. "This ring was forged centuries ago," he said, his voice laced with a hint of melancholy. "By my ancestor, the first Frostborn king. It was a symbol of a pact, an oath sworn between our two worlds." He turned to Eowyn, his eyes locking with hers. "The legend you heard in Hollowmere," he said, his voice low and intense. "It is based on truth, but it is not the whole truth. The story has been distorted over time, twisted by fear and misunderstanding." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her expression of confusion and apprehension. "The original pact was not a curse," he said, his voice firm, but not unkind. "It was an agreement, a partnership. The Frostborn kings were tasked with protecting the mortal realm from the dangers of the encroaching winter, from the creatures that thrived in the darkness and the cold. In return, a bride was chosen, not as a sacrifice, but as a liaison, a bridge between our two worlds." He held out the ring to Eowyn. "This ring," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "was given to the first bride as a symbol of that partnership, of that bond. It has been passed down through the generations, to each chosen bride, to each queen of winter." Eowyn stared at the ring, her mind reeling from the revelation. It was not a curse, but a partnership? Not a sacrifice, but a liaison? The legend had been wrong, twisted by fear and ignorance. But why me? She asked, her voice still trembling. Why am I the one? The king smiled, a faint, bittersweet smile. Because, he said, his voice soft and gentle, you are the descendant of that first bride. The blood of the ancient pact flows in your veins. You are the one who was promised in shadow long ago. He looked at her, his eyes filled with an ancient sorrow and an undeniable hope. And you are the one who can help me save both our worlds. The weight of his words, the weight of centuries, settled on Eowyn's shoulders. The ring, a symbol of that weight, seemed to hum with a power she was only beginning to comprehend. Chapter 6. The Bargain of Warmth. The silver ring, still held in the king's outstretched hand, seemed to pulse with a faint, ethereal light, a silent beacon in the dimly lit chamber. Eowyn stared at it, her mind struggling to reconcile the legend she had known all her life with the truth he had just revealed. A partnership, not a curse. A liaison, not a sacrifice. It was a radical shift in perspective, a rewriting of her entire understanding of the Frostborn King and his purpose. I don't know what to say, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. It's a lot to take in. He nodded, his expression understanding. I know, he said, his voice soft and gentle. It is a burden, a responsibility that you did not ask for. But it is yours nonetheless. He stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers, his gaze intense and unwavering. I understand your fear, your hesitation, he said, his voice low and resonant. But I promise you, Eowyn, I will not force you to do anything against your will. I will give you time, space, to understand, to accept or to reject. His words surprised her. She had expected him to be demanding, to insist on her immediate compliance, to wield his power over her. But instead, he was offering her a choice, a chance to make her own decision. It was a gesture of respect, of understanding, that she had not anticipated. Reject? She asked, her voice laced with disbelief. But the pact, the promise, he shook his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. The pact is not unbreakable, he said, his voice firm, but not unkind. It requires consent, willingness on both sides. Without that, it is meaningless. He lowered his hand, the ring still resting in his palm. I will not lie to you, Eowyn, he said, his voice laced with a hint of melancholy. My kingdom is in danger. The magic is fading, the connection to the mortal realm weakening. Without your help, we may not survive. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her expression of confusion and uncertainty. But your well-being, your happiness is also important to me, he said, his voice softening. I will not sacrifice you for the sake of my kingdom. I will not make you a prisoner in this palace. His words resonated deep within her, touching a chord of empathy, of understanding. She saw the genuine concern in his eyes, the weight of responsibility that he carried, the loneliness that had been his constant companion for centuries. What would happen if I rejected? She asked, her voice still trembling. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. I do not know, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Perhaps we would fade away, become nothing more than a legend, a story told to frighten children. Perhaps the mortal realm would succumb to the endless winter, to the darkness that lies beyond the veil. The thought was terrifying, not just for him, for his kingdom, but for her own world, for the village of Hollowmere, for the people she had known all her life. She had a responsibility, not just to him, but to them. She looked at the ring, at the symbol of the ancient pact, of the partnership that had been forged centuries ago. She felt a strange pull towards it, a sense of destiny, of a purpose she could no longer deny. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling slightly, and touched the cold, smooth surface of the silver. A jolt of energy, a wave of warmth, surged through her, spreading from her fingertips to the very core of her being. It was a sensation unlike anything she had ever experienced, a feeling of connection, of belonging, of a power she had never known she possessed. The king watched her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He knew that her decision would determine the fate of both their worlds. I don't know if I can be what you need me to be, she said, her voice still hesitant, but now with a hint of determination. I'm just an apothecary, a healer. I don't know anything about magic, about ruling a kingdom. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his face, chasing away the shadows of sadness and loneliness. You are more than you think, Eowyn, he said, his voice soft and encouraging. You have a strength, a resilience that I have rarely seen. And you have a connection to the earth, to the healing power of nature, that is invaluable. He took her hand, his touch gentle but firm, and placed the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, as if it had always belonged to her. I will teach you, he said, his voice low and resonant. I will guide you. I will help you discover the power that lies dormant within you. We will do this together. As the ring settled on her finger, Eowyn felt a profound shift within her, a sense of awakening, of a destiny unfolding. The fear was still there, but it was mingled with a growing sense of excitement, of anticipation, of a purpose she was finally beginning to understand. He raised her hand, his lips brushing against her knuckles, a gesture of respect, of affection. She shivered at his touch, not from cold, but from a strange, unfamiliar warmth that spread through her, a warmth that seemed to emanate from him, from the ring, from the very air around them. A bargain had been struck, not in words, but in the silent language of touch, of connection, of a shared destiny. A bargain of warmth, in the heart of winter. And, as she looked into those glacial eyes, she felt the first hesitant stirrings of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Chapter 7. Whispers of the Past. The days that followed were a whirlwind of new experiences, of learning and discovery, of a gradual thawing of the fear that had gripped Eowyn's heart. The king, who she now knew as Rorik, was a patient and surprisingly gentle teacher, guiding her through the intricacies of his world, revealing the secrets of his magic, the history of his kingdom. He showed her the vast libraries, filled with ancient tomes bound in ice, their pages filled with a language she didn't understand, yet somehow felt familiar. He explained the intricate carvings that adorned the palace walls, telling her the stories of his ancestors, of their battles against the creatures of darkness, of their triumphs and their failures. He taught her about the magic that flowed through his kingdom, the power that sustained the eternal winter, the energy that connected him to the mortal realm. He showed her how to draw on that power, how to feel its presence, how to shape it to her will. It was a slow, gradual process, filled with moments of frustration and self-doubt. Eowyn was not a natural sorceress, her skills honed in the practical arts of healing, of herbal remedies, of the tangible world of plants and potions. But Rorik was patient, encouraging, never once losing faith in her ability to learn. He also shared his name with her, a secret kept close, a vulnerability offered. Rorik, he'd said, his voice low, the sound of it both foreign and strangely fitting. It means famous ruler in the old tongue. A heavy name for a lonely king. The more she learned about him, the more she understood the burden he carried, the weight of his responsibility, the loneliness that had been his constant companion for centuries. He had been isolated for so long, cut off from the mortal realm, bound by the ancient pact, that he had forgotten what it was like to connect, to share, to trust. She, in turn, began to open up to him, sharing stories of her life in Hollowmere, of her late husband, Thomas, of her work as an apothecary, of the simple joys and sorrows of her everyday existence. She told him about her love for the earth, for the healing power of nature, for the connection she felt to the plants and herbs that grew in her garden. He listened intently, his eyes filled with a genuine interest, a curiosity that surprised and touched her. He asked questions, probing deeper, seeking to understand her world, her perspective, her heart. As they spent more time together, the initial fear and apprehension that Eowyn had felt began to dissipate, replaced by a growing respect, a sense of camaraderie, and something more. She found herself drawn to his intelligence, his quiet strength, his dry wit, his unexpected moments of vulnerability. She also discovered that he had a passion for knowledge, a thirst for understanding that mirrored her own. He spent hours in the libraries, poring over ancient texts, seeking to unravel the mysteries of the past, to find ways to strengthen the connection between his kingdom and the mortal realm. One evening, as they sat by the fire in her chambers, Rourke showed her a small, leather-bound book, its pages filled with faded handwriting and intricate drawings. "This was my mother's journal," he said, his voice laced with a hint of melancholy. "She was the last queen of winter, before the connection was broken." Eowyn took the book, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the faded script, the delicate drawings of plants and flowers, the notes on herbal remedies and potions. "She was a healer," Eowyn said, her voice filled with surprise. "Just like me." Rourke nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "She was," he said, his voice soft and gentle. "She had a gift for healing, for understanding the power of nature. She used her knowledge to help her people, to protect them from illness and disease." Eowyn turned the pages, her eyes captivated by the intricate drawings, the detailed descriptions of plants and their properties. She recognized many of the herbs, the remedies, the techniques that she herself used in her own practice. "It's amazing," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "It's like reading my own notes." Rourke watched her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and pride. "She would have liked you," he said, his voice low and resonant. "She would have seen in you the same strength, the same compassion, the same connection to the earth." His words touched her deeply, resonating with a sense of kinship, of a shared heritage, of a connection that went beyond the ancient pact, beyond the promise that had brought them together. As she continued to read, she stumbled upon a passage that caught her attention. It was a description of a ritual, a ceremony designed to strengthen the bond between the Frostborn king and his queen, to enhance their connection to the magic of winter, to restore the balance between their two worlds. "What is this?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Rourke leaned closer, his eyes scanning the faded script. "It is the binding ceremony," he said, his voice hushed and reverent. "A ritual that has not been performed in centuries. It is said to amplify the power of the queen, to awaken her full potential, to solidify the connection between our two realms." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her expression of interest and apprehension. "It is a powerful ritual," he said, his voice laced with caution.
"And it is not without risk."
"It requires a deep level of trust, of vulnerability, on both sides." Eowyn looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw the hope in his gaze, the desire to restore his kingdom to its former glory, but she also saw the concern, the fear of putting her in danger. The whispers of the past, of his mother's legacy, of the ancient pact, seemed to swirl around them, weaving a tapestry of destiny, of responsibility, of a choice that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She knew what he was asking, without him having to say the words. And, in that moment, surrounded by the echoes of history and the promise of a future, she found her answer not in logic, but in the quiet certainty of her heart. Chapter 8. The Unseen Bond. The decision had been made, unspoken yet understood, hanging in the air between them like the delicate frost patterns that adorn the windows of winter's hold. The binding ceremony. A ritual lost to time, a gamble with the very essence of their beings, a potential solution to the fading magic of Rourke's kingdom. Eowyn, despite the lingering tendrils of fear, felt a growing sense of inevitability, a pull towards this ancient rite, a feeling that it was not just Rourke's destiny, but hers as well. Preparations began the next morning. Rourke guided her through the palace, to a hidden chamber deep beneath the ice, a place where the magic of winter was strongest, where the veil between the realms was thinnest. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with shimmering crystals that pulsed with a faint, blue light. In the center stood a large, circular altar, made of pure, unblemished ice, its surface smooth and reflective. "This is where the ceremony will take place," Rorik said, his voice hushed and reverent. "It is a sacred place, a place of power, where the energies of winter converge." Eowyn looked around, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. She could feel the energy, a palpable force that hummed in the air, that resonated deep within her bones. It was a powerful, overwhelming sensation, a feeling of being connected to something ancient and vast, something beyond her comprehension. Rorik explained the ritual, step by step, his voice calm and reassuring. He told her what to expect, what she would need to do, what she might feel. He emphasized the importance of trust, of vulnerability, of opening herself completely to the magic, to him. "It will be intense, Eowyn," he said, his eyes searching hers. "There will be moments of discomfort, perhaps even pain. But I will be with you every step of the way. I will not let any harm come to you." His words, spoken with such sincerity, such conviction, helped to quell the rising tide of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She trusted him, she realized. Despite the strangeness of their situation, despite the power he wielded, she trusted him implicitly. It was a strange, unexpected feeling, a bond that had formed between them, unseen yet unbreakable. Over the next few days, they prepared, gathering the necessary ingredients for the ritual, practicing the incantations, meditating to strengthen their connection to the magic, to each other. Eowyn found herself drawn to the process, to the ancient knowledge, to the feeling of power that surged through her as she learned to control the energies of winter. She discovered a hidden talent, a natural affinity for the magic that surprised even Rorik. She could manipulate the ice, shape it to her will, create intricate sculptures of frozen flowers, conjure shimmering snowflakes that danced in the air. She could feel the energy flowing through her, a vibrant, exhilarating force that made her feel alive, connected, empowered. Rorik watched her progress with a mixture of pride and something else. A growing admiration, a deepening affection that he could no longer deny, even to himself. He had chosen her for her lineage, for her connection to the ancient pact, but he was beginning to realize that she was far more than just a vessel for the magic. She was intelligent, compassionate, strong-willed, and fiercely independent. She challenged him, questioned him, made him see the world through new eyes. As the day of the ceremony approached, the tension between them grew, a palpable energy that crackled in the air like static electricity. It was a mixture of anticipation, of fear, and something more. A growing awareness of each other, a subtle shift in their dynamic, from king and subject to teacher and student, to something that neither of them was quite ready to name. On the eve of the ceremony, they sat together in her chambers, the blue flames of the fireplace casting dancing shadows on the walls. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar, a testament to the bond that had formed between them. "Are you afraid?" Rorik asked, his voice low and hesitant. Eowyn looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw the concern in his gaze, the genuine care that he felt for her. She smiled, a faint, reassuring smile. "A little," she admitted, her voice honest and open. "But I'm also excited. Curious. I want to see what I'm capable of. I want to help you, help your kingdom." He nodded, his expression softening. "You have already helped me, Eowyn," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "More than you know. You have reminded me what it means to feel, to connect, to hope." His words touched her deeply, resonating with a warmth that spread through her, chasing away the lingering chill of fear. She reached out a hand, her fingers brushing against his. He intertwined his fingers with hers, and the moment was a snapshot, painting across the canvas of Eowyn's mind. It was a moment of vulnerability without fear. It was a moment of possibility, of something blossoming. It was a moment before everything changed. The ceremony awaited. Chapter 9. A glimmer of thawing. The chamber was bathed in an ethereal blue light, the crystals on the walls pulsing with a rhythmic energy that seemed to synchronize with Eowyn's heartbeat. She stood before the altar, clad in a simple white gown, her bare feet sinking slightly into the plush fur rug that had been placed beneath it. Rorik stood opposite her, his eyes the color of the glacial ice that surrounded them, his expression a mixture of solemnity and anticipation. He raised his hands, his long, slender fingers tracing intricate patterns in the air, and began to chant in the ancient language of his people, a language that Éowyn didn't understand, yet somehow felt in her very bones. The air around them crackled with energy, a palpable force that pressed against her skin, that made her hair stand on end. She closed her eyes, focusing on Rorik's voice, on the rhythm of the chant, on the energy that flowed through the chamber, through her. She opened herself to the magic, allowing it to wash over her, to penetrate her, to fill her with its power. She felt a tingling sensation, a warmth that started in her fingertips and spread through her body, chasing away the chill of the ice, awakening something deep within her. She felt a connection to Rorik, a bond that strengthened with each passing moment, a merging of their energies, of their minds, of their souls. The chanting intensified, the energy building, the light growing brighter. Éowyn felt herself lifted, her feet leaving the ground, her body floating in the air, surrounded by a swirling vortex of snow and ice. She felt a moment of panic, a fear of losing control, of being swept away by the power. But then she felt Rorik's presence, his hand reaching out to hers, his fingers intertwining with hers, a grounding force that anchored her, that calmed her fears, that reassured her. She opened her eyes, her gaze locking with his. She saw the trust in his eyes, the unwavering support, the love the word hung in the air between them, unspoken yet undeniable. It was a love born not of romance, not of passion, but of something deeper, something more profound. A love born of shared purpose, of mutual respect, of a connection that transcended the boundaries of their two worlds. The energy reached its peak, a blinding flash of light that filled the chamber, that consumed them both. Éowyn felt a surge of power, a rush of energy that flowed through her, transforming her, changing her, awakening her full potential. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The light faded, the energy subsided, the chanting ceased. Éowyn found herself standing on the ground, her body trembling, her mind reeling from the intensity of the experience. Rorik stood before her, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and relief. He reached out a hand, his fingers brushing against her cheek, a gesture of tenderness, of affection. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Éowyn nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I think so. I feel different. Stronger." She looked at her hands, at the faint, blue glow that emanated from her skin. She felt the magic coursing through her veins, a vibrant, exhilarating force that made her feel alive, connected, empowered. "You did it, Éowyn," Rorik said, his voice filled with pride. "You embraced the magic. You awakened your full potential. You are truly the Queen of Winter." His words resonated deep within her, confirming what she already felt. She was no longer just Éowyn Vale, the apothecary from Hollowmere. She was something more, something greater. She was a part of this world, a part of this magic, a part of Rorik's destiny. As they left the chamber, walking hand in hand, Éowyn felt a shift in their dynamic, a subtle change in their relationship. The formality, the distance, that had characterized their interactions in the beginning was gone, replaced by a sense of ease, of familiarity, of intimacy. They spent the following days exploring her newfound powers, experimenting with the magic, learning to control it, to shape it to her will. Éowyn discovered that she had a natural affinity for healing, for using the energy of winter to mend injuries, to soothe pain, to restore life. She used her powers to heal the frozen plants in the palace gardens, coaxing them back to life, creating a vibrant oasis of color amidst the endless expanse of ice and snow. She healed the injured animals that Rorik brought to her, creatures of the winter realm that had been harmed by the fading magic, by the encroaching darkness. Rorik watched her with a growing admiration, a deepening love that he could no longer deny. He saw in her not just a queen, but a partner, a companion, a friend. He saw in her the hope for his kingdom, the promise of a future he had thought lost. One evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the frozen landscape, the aurora borealis dancing in the sky above them, Rorik turned to Eowyn, his eyes filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Eowyn," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "I know that our relationship began as a pact, as a duty, but it has become so much more than that.
For me."
Eowyn looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what he was saying, what he was asking. And she knew, with a certainty that surprised even herself, that she felt the same. She reached out a hand, her fingers brushing against his cheek, a gesture of affection, of love. "For me too, Rorik," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "It has become so much more." He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a tentative, hesitant kiss that sent a shiver of warmth through her, a warmth that melted the ice around her heart, a warmth that promised a future filled with love, with hope, with a connection that transcended the boundaries of their two worlds. The glimmer of thawing had begun, not just in her heart, but in the very essence of the Winter Kingdom itself. It was a fragile thing, this new warmth, but it held the promise of spring. Chapter 10. The Heart of the Storm. The kiss, a tentative exploration of uncharted territory, marked a turning point in Eowyn and Rorik's relationship. It was a silent acknowledgement of the feelings that had been simmering beneath the surface, a release of the tension that had been building between them, a promise of a future that was both terrifying and exhilarating. In the days that followed, their connection deepened, their bond strengthened, their love blossoming like a fragile flower in the heart of winter. They spent hours together, exploring the palace, sharing stories, discovering the hidden corners of each other's hearts. They walked hand in hand through the frozen gardens, their laughter echoing in the stillness, their breath mingling in the cold air. Eowyn continued to explore her newfound powers, her control over the magic growing stronger with each passing day. She learned to summon blizzards, to create sculptures of ice, to command the creatures of the winter realm. She used her healing abilities to tend to the needs of Rorik's people, earning their respect and their affection. But their newfound happiness was not without its shadows. The fading magic of the kingdom, the encroaching darkness that threatened to consume it, was a constant reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. Rorik knew that the binding ceremony had only been a temporary solution, a way to buy them time, to strengthen their connection, to prepare them for the final battle. He began to teach Eowyn about the source of the darkness, the ancient enemy that had plagued his kingdom for centuries. He told her about the Shadowlands, a realm of eternal night, ruled by a creature of immense power, a being known only as the Nightbringer. The Nightbringer seeks to extinguish the light, to plunge both our worlds into eternal darkness, Rorik explained, his voice laced with a hint of fear. He feeds on the magic, on the life force of the land, draining it of its power, leaving it barren and desolate. He showed her ancient texts depicting battles between the Frostborn kings and the Nightbringer, of victories won and losses suffered. He told her about the sacrifices that had been made, the lives that had been lost, in the fight to protect their worlds. "The connection between our realms is weakening," he said, his voice grave. "The Nightbringer is growing stronger. He is preparing to launch a final assault, to break through the veil and claim both our worlds for his own." Eowyn listened intently, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She understood the gravity of the situation, the responsibility that rested on their shoulders. She knew that they had to find a way to stop the Nightbringer, to protect their kingdoms, to save their worlds. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice filled with urgency. "How can we defeat him?" Rorik sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "I do not know," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "The ancient texts speak of a prophecy, of a weapon that can defeat the Nightbringer, but its location has been lost to time." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her expression of concern and determination. "But there is one thing we can do," he said, his voice gaining strength. We can strengthen the connection between our realms. We can reinforce the veil. We can make it harder for the Nightbringer to break through. He explained that the heart of the magic, the source of the power that sustained the Winter Kingdom, lay at the center of the storm, a place of immense energy, of constant turmoil, of perpetual blizzard. It is a dangerous place, Yoan, he said, his voice laced with caution. No one has ventured there in centuries. But it is our only hope. We must journey to the heart of the storm and perform a ritual to strengthen the veil, to reinforce the connection between our realms. Yoan knew that it was a risky undertaking, a perilous journey that could cost them their lives. But she also knew that it was their only chance. She looked at Rorik, her eyes filled with determination. Then we must go, she said, her voice firm and unwavering. We must face the storm, together. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that lit up his face, chasing away the shadows of doubt and fear. He reached out a hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Together, he repeated, his voice filled with love and hope. We will face the storm, together. They began to prepare for their journey, gathering supplies, studying the ancient maps, practicing the ritual that they would perform at the heart of the storm. The anticipation, the fear, the excitement, mingled with the tenderness of their love, creating a potent mixture of emotions that fueled their determination. As they stood on the precipice of their perilous journey, the heart of the storm swirling in the distance, a maelstrom of ice and snow and untamed magic, Yoan knew that their love, their bond, would be their greatest weapon, their strongest shield, their guiding light in the darkness that lay ahead. They were ready, or at least as ready as they could ever be. Chapter 11. The Price of Defiance. The journey to the heart of the storm was a brutal test of endurance, relentless assault on both body and spirit. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping the snow into a blinding frenzy, tearing at their clothes, biting at their exposed skin. The cold was intense, a bone-chilling force that seeped into their very marrow, threatening to freeze them from the inside out. Rorik led the way, his powerful magic creating a shimmering shield that protected them from the worst of the elements. Yoan followed close behind, her own magic bolstering his, their energies intertwined, their bond a source of strength and resilience. They navigated through treacherous terrain, across frozen wastelands, over towering ice formations, around gaping crevasses that threatened to swallow them whole. They encountered creatures of the storm, grotesque beings of ice and shadow, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Rorik fought them off with his sword, a blade of pure, unblemished ice that shimmered with an ethereal light. Yoan used her magic to create shields, to summon blizzards, to unleash bolts of freezing energy that shattered their icy forms. They worked together seamlessly, their movements synchronized, their minds linked, their love a beacon in the darkness. They protected each other, supported each other, drew strength from each other. But the journey took its toll. The cold, the wind, the constant threat of danger wore them down, both physically and emotionally. They were exhausted, battered, bruised, their bodies aching, their spirits flagging. Yoan stumbled, her legs giving way beneath her. Rorik caught her, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper.
I'm usted.
"We need to rest." He looked around, searching for shelter, for a place to escape the relentless storm. He spotted a small cave, hidden behind a towering ice formation, a potential refuge from the elements. He led her to the cave, his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. They huddled together inside, shivering, their breath mingling in the cold air. Rorik used his magic to create a small fire, a flicker of blue flames that provided a modicum of warmth, a beacon of hope in the darkness. They sat close together, sharing their meager rations, their silence filled with unspoken words, with shared fear, with unwavering love. "We're almost there, Yoan," Rorik said, his voice low and reassuring. "Just a little further. We can do this." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "I know," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We will do this. Together." They rested for a few hours, gathering their strength, preparing for the final push. As they emerged from the cave, they were greeted by an even more ferocious storm, the wind howling with renewed intensity, the snow falling thicker than ever. They pressed on, their bodies aching, their spirits tested to the limit. They could see the heart of the storm now, a swirling vortex of ice and snow, a maelstrom of untamed energy that pulsed with a terrifying power. As they approached, they were attacked by a creature of immense size and power, a monstrous being of ice and shadow, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. It was the guardian of the storm, the protector of the heart of the magic. Rorik drew his sword, his face grim, his body tensed for battle. "Stay behind me, Yoan," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "This is my fight." But Yoan refused. She stepped forward, her own magic flaring to life, her eyes filled with determination. "No," she said, her voice ringing with defiance. "This is our fight. We do this together." They fought side by side, their energies intertwined, their love a weapon against the darkness. Rorik's sword clashed against the creature's claws, sparks of ice flying through the air. Yoan unleashed bolts of freezing energy, summoning blizzards, creating shields of ice. The battle was fierce, brutal, a desperate struggle for survival. The creature was powerful, its attacks relentless, its strength seemingly inexhaustible. Rorik was wounded, his arm slashed by the creature's claws, blood staining the snow a crimson red. Yoan cried out in fear, her heart filled with a desperate urge to protect him. She unleashed a surge of power, a wave of freezing energy that slammed into the creature, sending it reeling backward. But the creature recovered quickly, its eyes burning with rage. It lunged at Yoan, its claws outstretched, its intent clear. Rorik saw the danger, his heart filled with terror. He threw himself in front of Yoan, shielding her with his body, taking the full force of the creature's attack. The creature's claws ripped through his flesh, tearing into his chest, a mortal wound that sent a wave of agony through his body. He cried out in pain, his legs giving way beneath him, his body falling to the snow-covered ground. The price of defiance, of love, of protection, was etched in the crimson stains spreading across the pristine white. Yoan screamed. Chapter 12. The Hunter's Moon. Yoan's scream echoed through the storm, a raw, primal sound of anguish and despair. She dropped to her knees beside Rorik, her hands hovering over his wound, trembling, unsure of what to do. Blood welled up from the deep gashes in his chest, staining his tunic a horrifying crimson, spreading across the pristine white snow like a malevolent stain. "Rorik."
"No."
She cried, her voice choked with sobs. "Please." No, he looked at her, his eyes filled with pain, but also with a deep, unwavering love. He reached out a hand, his fingers cold and weak, brushing against her cheek. "Yoan," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. "It's all right." "No, it's not all right," she cried, tears streaming down her face, freezing on her cheeks. "You're hurt badly. I need to." She frantically searched her mind, her knowledge of healing, of herbal remedies, of magic, racing through her thoughts. But she knew, deep down, that it was beyond her abilities. The wound was too deep, too severe, the damage too extensive. The creature, momentarily stunned by Yoan's earlier attack, was recovering, its eyes glowing with renewed rage. It stalked towards them, its claws dripping with Rorik's blood, its intent clear. Yoan knew she had to protect him, even if it meant sacrificing herself. She stood up, her body trembling, her magic flaring to life, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. "Stay back," she shouted at the creature, her voice ringing with defiance. "You will not touch him." She unleashed a torrent of power, a wave of freezing energy that slammed into the creature, sending it flying backward, crashing into a nearby ice formation. But she knew it wouldn't hold it for long. It was too powerful, too relentless. She knelt beside Rorik again, her heart breaking with each shallow breath he took. She cradled his head in her lap, her tears falling onto his face, mingling with his blood. "I'm so sorry, Rorik," she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. I couldn't protect you," he smiled weakly, his eyes filled with a tenderness that defied the pain. "You did protect me, Yoan," he whispered, his voice growing fainter. "You saved me many times," he coughed, a spasm of pain racking his body. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "Don't talk," she pleaded, her voice desperate. "Save your strength," he shook his head, his eyes fixed on hers. "I need to tell you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The ritual, you must complete it." "No," she cried, her voice filled with anguish. "I can't, not without you." "You can," he insisted, his voice growing weaker. "You are strong, Yoan, stronger than you know." He reached out a hand, his fingers grasping hers, his grip surprisingly firm. "The heart of the storm," he whispered, his voice fading. "The weapon, you must find it." His eyes closed, his grip on her hand loosening. His breathing stopped.
His body went still.
Yoan stared at him, her mind unable to comprehend what had just happened. He was gone. Rorik, her love, her partner, her king, was gone. A wave of grief, of despair, of utter devastation washed over her, threatening to drown her in its intensity. She screamed again, a long, agonizing cry that echoed through the storm, a sound of pure, unadulterated loss. But she knew she couldn't give in to her grief. She had a duty, a promise to fulfill. Rorik had entrusted her with a mission, a task that was now hers alone to complete. She gently laid his body on the snow, her tears freezing on his pale face. She kissed his forehead, a final farewell, a silent vow to avenge his death, to complete his mission, to save their worlds. She stood up, her body trembling, her heart aching, but her eyes filled with a fierce determination. She looked towards the heart of the storm, the swirling vortex of ice and snow that pulsed with a terrifying power. The full moon, previously hidden by clouds, broke through, bathing the landscape in eerie, silver light. It was the hunter's moon, a celestial sign of power, of transformation, of the hunt. She knew what she had to do. She had to journey to the heart of the storm, to complete the ritual, to find the weapon, to defeat the Nightbringer. She had to do it for Rorik, for his kingdom, for her world, for the memory of their love. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenge ahead. She summoned her magic, her power flaring to life, surrounding her with a shimmering shield of ice. She started to walk, her footsteps firm and unwavering, towards the heart of the storm, towards her destiny. The hunter's moon illuminated her path, a silent guide in the darkness, a symbol of hope amidst the despair. Chapter 13. Scars of the Soul. The heart of the storm was a maelstrom of chaos, a swirling vortex of ice and snow and untamed magic. The wind howled like 1,000 tormented souls. The cold was intense, a force that threatened to tear Yoan apart, to freeze her solid, to extinguish her very existence. She pressed on, her body battered, her spirit bruised, her heart aching with the loss of Rorik. She clung to his memory, to his love, to his unwavering belief in her, as a lifeline in the darkness, a source of strength in the face of overwhelming adversity. She reached the center of the storm, a place of eerie calm amidst the surrounding chaos. The air was still, the snow falling gently, the silence profound. In the center stood a towering spire of ice, its surface shimmering with an ethereal light, its peak reaching towards the heavens. This was it, the heart of the magic, the source of the power that sustained the Winter Kingdom. This was where she had to perform the ritual, to strengthen the veil, to reinforce the connection between the realms. She approached the spire, her hands trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. She placed her hands on the cold, smooth surface of the ice, closing her eyes, focusing her mind, summoning her magic. She began to chant, the words of the ancient ritual flowing from her lips, a language she now understood, a power she now commanded. She felt the energy surge through her, a vibrant, exhilarating force that connected her to the heart of the storm, to the essence of winter, to the spirit of Rorik. As she chanted, the spire began to glow, the light intensifying, the energy building. The air around her crackled with power, the snow swirling faster, the wind picking up. She felt a presence, a vast, ancient intelligence, a consciousness that resided within the heart of the storm. It spoke to her, not in words, but in images, in feelings, in sensations. It showed her the history of the Winter Kingdom, the battles fought, the sacrifices made, the love that had endured. It showed her the threat of the Nightbringer, the encroaching darkness, the imminent danger. It also showed her the weapon, the prophecy, the key to defeating the enemy. It was not a physical object, not a sword or a staff or a talisman. It was something far more profound, something far more powerful. It was her. Eowyn was the weapon. Her connection to the earth, to the healing power of nature, to the magic of winter, to the love she had shared with Rorik, it was all part of the prophecy, all part of the plan. She was the one who could bridge the gap between the realms, the one who could unite the forces of light, the one who could defeat the Nightbringer. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. It was a terrifying, overwhelming responsibility, a burden she wasn't sure she could bear. But she also knew that she had no choice. She had to embrace her destiny, to fulfill her purpose, to honor Rorik's memory, to save their worlds. The ritual reached its climax, a blinding flash of light that erupted from the spire, shooting up into the sky, piercing the clouds, reaching towards the heavens. Eowyn felt a surge of power, a transformation, a change that went beyond the physical, that touched the very core of her being. She felt the scars of her soul, the wounds of grief and loss, begin to heal, replaced by a newfound strength, a fierce determination, a burning desire to fight, to protect, to avenge. When the light faded, she stood before the spire, her body trembling, her mind reeling, but her heart filled with a newfound resolve. She was no longer just Eowyn Vale, the apothecary, the widow, the queen of winter. She was something more, something greater. She was the weapon. She was the hope. She was the heart of the storm. She looked up at the sky, at the hunter's moon that shone down on her, a silent witness to her transformation. She knew that the battle was far from over, that the Nightbringer was still out there, that the darkness was still encroaching. But she was ready. She was prepared. She would face the enemy. She would fight for her kingdom. She would avenge Rorik's death. She would save their worlds. She turned and began to walk away from the heart of the storm, her footsteps firm and unwavering, her silhouette a lone figure against the backdrop of the swirling snow and ice. The scars of her soul, though still present, were no longer a source of weakness, but a testament to her strength, her resilience, her unwavering love. They were a reminder of what she had lost, but also of what she had gained. And most importantly, of what she was fighting for. The wind howled, but this time, it carried a note of defiance, of hope, of the promise of victory. Chapter 14. The Forgotten Kingdom. The journey back from the heart of the storm was less arduous, the magic within Eowyn now resonating with the energies of the winter realm, shielding her from the worst of the elements. The blizzard seemed to part before her, the wind whispering encouragement instead of defiance. Yet, the physical ease did little to soothe the turmoil within her soul. Rorik's absence was a gaping wound, a constant ache that permeated every thought, every action. She returned to Winter's Hold, the palace feeling both familiar and alien. It was her home now, yet it echoed with the absence of its king, with the silence of a love lost too soon. The ethereal beings who inhabited the palace greeted her with a mixture of respect and sorrow, their pale eyes reflecting the shared grief of their kingdom. Eowyn went to their chambers, the room they had shared, the space that held the remnants of their brief but profound connection. The blue fire still crackled in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls, but the warmth it offered felt hollow, insufficient to fill the void within her. She sat on the bed, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns of the fur blankets, the same blankets that had once held them both. She closed her eyes, summoning Rorik's image, his smile, his voice, the feel of his touch. But the memories, though vivid, were tinged with a pain that threatened to consume her. She knew she couldn't stay here, lost in her grief. She had a duty, a promise to fulfill. She had to find a way to defeat the Nightbringer, to save their worlds, to honor Rorik's memory. She remembered the vision she had received at the heart of the storm, the realization that she was the weapon, the key to defeating the enemy. But she still didn't fully understand how. What was she supposed to do? Where was she supposed to go? She decided to seek answers in Rorik's library, the vast collection of ancient tomes that held the secrets of his kingdom, the knowledge of his ancestors. She spent hours poring over the faded texts, deciphering the cryptic language, searching for clues, for guidance, for anything that could help her. She stumbled upon a passage that spoke of a forgotten kingdom, a realm hidden deep within the Shadowlands, a place where the veil between the worlds was thinnest, where the power of the Nightbringer was strongest. The passage described this kingdom as a place of ancient magic, of forgotten rituals, of lost knowledge. It spoke of a hidden gateway, a portal that could lead to the heart of the Nightbringer's power, to the source of his strength. It also spoke of a guardian, a protector of this forgotten kingdom, a being of immense power who held the key to unlocking the gateway, to accessing the Nightbringer's realm. Eowyn realized that this was her destination, her next step in the fight against the darkness. She had to find this forgotten kingdom, to seek out the guardian, to unlock the gateway, to confront the Nightbringer in his own domain. It was a perilous undertaking, a journey into the heart of enemy territory, a mission fraught with danger. But she had no other choice.
She had to try.
She prepared for her journey, gathering supplies, studying the ancient maps, honing her magic. She knew that she would be facing challenges unlike anything she had ever encountered before, that she would be tested to her limits, both physically and emotionally. But she was ready. She had the power of the Winter Realm within her, the memory of Rorik's love to guide her, the determination to avenge his death, to save their worlds. As she stood at the threshold of Winter's Hold, ready to embark on her perilous journey, she looked back at the palace, at the place that had become her home, at the kingdom she had sworn to protect. She knew that she might not return, that this journey could be her last. But she also knew that she had to face the darkness, to fight for the light, to honor the promise she had made. She took a deep breath, steeled herself for the challenges ahead, and stepped out into the swirling snow, her silhouette a lone figure against the backdrop of the endless winter. The forgotten kingdom awaited, a place of shadows and secrets, of ancient magic and forgotten power. It was a place where her destiny would be revealed, where the final battle would be fought, where the fate of two worlds would be decided. Chapter 15. A Dance with Fate. The journey into the Shadowlands was a descent into a realm of perpetual twilight, a place where the sun never shone, where the air was thick with a chilling mist, where the very landscape seemed to exude an aura of menace. The vibrant blues and whites of the Winter Realm were replaced by shades of gray and black, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind and the occasional, unsettling cry of unseen creatures. Eowyn moved with caution, her senses heightened, her magic a shield against the oppressive darkness. She followed the ancient map, its faded markings guiding her through the treacherous terrain, across desolate plains, over jagged mountains, through shadowy forests. She encountered creatures of the Shadowlands, grotesque beings of darkness, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. They attacked her relentlessly, their claws sharp, their teeth bared, their intent to kill, to consume, to extinguish the light that she carried within her. She fought them off with her magic, summoning blizzards, creating shields of ice, unleashing bolts of freezing energy. She drew strength from the memory of Rorik, from his love, from his unwavering belief in her. She fought for him, for his kingdom, for her world, for the hope of a future free from darkness. The journey was long and arduous, testing her endurance, pushing her to her limits. She was exhausted, battered, bruised, her body aching, her spirit weary. But she pressed on, driven by her determination, fueled by her love, guided by her destiny. After what seemed like an eternity, she reached her destination, the Forgotten Kingdom. It was a desolate, ruined city, its buildings crumbling, its streets overgrown with weeds, its atmosphere heavy with a sense of ancient sorrow, of lost glory. She navigated through the ruins, searching for the hidden gateway, the portal to the Nightbringer's realm. She followed the clues from the ancient text, deciphering the cryptic symbols, unraveling the forgotten riddles. She found the gateway hidden deep within the ruins of an ancient temple, a circular structure of black stone, its surface covered in intricate carvings, its center a swirling vortex of darkness. She knew that this was it, the entrance to the Nightbringer's realm, the place where she would face her final challenge. She also knew that she needed the Guardian's help, the key to unlocking the gateway, to accessing the Nightbringer's power. She searched the temple, her senses alert, her magic at the ready. She found the Guardian in a hidden chamber, a figure shrouded in shadows, its presence radiating an aura of immense power. The Guardian was not what she expected. It was not a monstrous creature, not a terrifying beast, but a woman, tall and slender, her face veiled, her eyes glowing with an ethereal light.
"Who are you?"
Ioan asked, her voice cautious but firm. "Are you the guardian of this place?" The woman nodded, her voice soft and melodic, yet filled with an ancient sorrow.
"I am," she said.
"I am Lyra, the last of the Shadow Walkers, the protector of this forgotten kingdom. I seek passage to the Nightbringer's realm," Ioan said, her voice unwavering. "I need your help to unlock the gateway." Lyra studied her for a moment, her eyes piercing, her gaze seeming to see through her, to lay bare her soul. "You are the Queen of Winter," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of surprise and recognition. "The one who was promised." "Yes," Ioan said, her voice firm. "I am Ioan Vale, and I am here to defeat the Nightbringer, to save our worlds." Lyra nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I have been waiting for you," she said. "For centuries, I have guarded this gateway, waiting for the one who could wield the power, who could face the darkness, who could bring balance back to our realms." She stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "I will help you," she said. "I will unlock the gateway. But be warned, Ioan. The Nightbringer is a formidable foe.
His power is immense.
His darkness is all-consuming. You will face challenges unlike anything you have ever encountered before." "I know," Ioan said, her voice unwavering. "But I am ready. I have to be." Lyra smiled, a genuine, warm smile that lit up her face, chasing away the shadows of sorrow. "Then let us begin," she said. "Let us dance with fate and see where it leads us." They stood before the gateway, their hands joined, their energies merging. Lyra began to chant, her voice resonating with ancient power, the words of a forgotten language flowing from her lips. The gateway responded, the swirling vortex of darkness intensifying, the carvings on the stone glowing with an eerie light. The air around them crackled with energy, a palpable force that pressed against Ioan's skin, that made her hair stand on end. The gateway opened, a portal to another realm, a doorway to darkness, a path to the final confrontation. Ioan looked at Lyra, her eyes filled with gratitude and determination. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "For your help. For your trust." Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension.
"Go now, Ioan," she said.
"Face your destiny, and may the light guide you." Ioan took a deep breath, steeled herself for what lay ahead, and stepped through the gateway into the heart of the Nightbringer's realm, into the final battle for the fate of two worlds. It was a step into the unknown, a leap of faith, a dance with fate, a moment that would define her forever. Chapter 16. The Shattered Mirror. The Nightbringer's realm was a landscape of utter desolation, a place where darkness reigned supreme, where the very air was thick with a palpable sense of evil. The sky was a swirling vortex of black clouds, lit only by flashes of eerie, green lightning. The ground was barren and cracked, littered with the bones of long-dead creatures. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional, guttural roar of unseen monsters. Eowyn moved with caution, her senses on high alert, her magic a shield against the encroaching darkness. The cold here was different, not the invigorating chill of the winter realm, but a soul-sucking emptiness that threatened to drain her of her strength, her will, her very life force. She followed the path that Lyra had shown her, a treacherous trail that wound through the desolate landscape, leading towards the heart of the Nightbringer's power. She encountered creatures of darkness, grotesque beings of shadow and nightmare, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. They attacked her relentlessly, their claws sharp, their teeth bared, their intent to kill, to consume, to extinguish the light that she carried within her. She fought them off with her magic, summoning blizzards, creating shields of ice, unleashing bolts of freezing energy that shattered their shadowy forms. But the battles took their toll. She was weary, her body aching, her spirit flagging. The darkness of the realm seeped into her, whispering doubts, feeding her fears, threatening to overwhelm her. She clung to the memory of Rorik, to his love, to his unwavering belief in her, as a lifeline in the darkness, a source of strength in the face of overwhelming adversity. She fought for him, for his kingdom, for her world, for the hope of a future free from darkness. She reached the heart of the Nightbringer's power, a towering fortress of black obsidian, its walls shimmering with an unholy light, its gates guarded by monstrous creatures of shadow. She knew that this was it, the final confrontation, the place where she would face the Nightbringer, where the fate of two worlds would be decided. She approached the fortress, her heart pounding in her chest, her magic flaring to life. The gates opened, revealing a vast, circular chamber, its walls lined with mirrors, its floor a swirling vortex of darkness. In the center of the chamber stood the Nightbringer, a figure of immense power and terrifying presence. He was tall and slender, his body shrouded in shadows, his face obscured by a mask of black obsidian, his eyes glowing with a malevolent, green light. "So, the Queen of Winter finally arrives," the Nightbringer said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that echoed through the chamber. "I have been expecting you." Eowyn stood her ground, her eyes fixed on his, her voice firm and unwavering. "I am here to stop you, Nightbringer," she said. "To end your reign of darkness. To save our worlds." He laughed, a chilling, mocking sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You, a mere mortal? You cannot hope to defeat me. I am the master of this realm, the Lord of Darkness, the bringer of eternal night. I am more than a mortal," Eowyn said, her voice ringing with defiance. "I am the weapon. I am the hope. I am the heart of the storm." She unleashed her magic, a torrent of power that slammed into the Nightbringer, sending him reeling backward. But he recovered quickly, his eyes burning with rage. "You may have the power of winter," he said, his voice laced with venom. "But I have the power of darkness. And darkness always prevails." He attacked, his movements swift and deadly, his power overwhelming. He summoned shadows, creatures of nightmare, bolts of dark energy that struck Eowyn with the force of a physical blow. She fought back, summoning blizzards, creating shields of ice, unleashing bolts of freezing energy. But the Nightbringer was too strong, too powerful. He deflected her attacks, countered her moves, pushed her to her limits. He smashed her shields, shattered her ice, forced her to retreat. He struck her with a bolt of dark energy, sending her flying across the chamber, crashing into one of the mirrors that lined the walls. The mirror shattered, its fragments scattering across the floor, reflecting distorted images of Eowyn, of the Nightbringer, of the battle that raged between them. As she lay there, dazed and wounded, she saw something in the shattered fragments, something that caught her attention, something that gave her a glimmer of hope. She saw her reflection, but it wasn't just her. She saw Rorik, standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with love and support. She saw Lyra, the guardian of the Forgotten Kingdom, her face filled with hope and determination. She saw the people of Hollowmere, her friends, her neighbors, their faces filled with fear, but also with faith. She realized that she wasn't alone. She had the strength of her love, the support of her friends, the power of two worlds behind her. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for them, for everyone she loved, for everyone who believed in her. She stood up, her body aching, her spirit wounded, but her resolve renewed. She looked at the Nightbringer, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. "You may have the power of darkness," she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "But I have the power of love, and love always prevails." She unleashed her full power, a torrent of energy that combined the magic of winter with the strength of her love, with the hope of two worlds. It was a power that the Nightbringer had never encountered before, a power that could not be contained, a power that could shatter the darkness. The shattered mirror reflected not her weakness, but her strength. It was a mosaic of all she was, all she had become, all she represented. Chapter 17. Tears of Ice and Fire. The power that surged through Eowyn was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was a fusion of her inherent connection to the earth, the magic of the winter realm amplified by the binding ceremony, and the unwavering strength of her love for Rorik and her people. It was a force that resonated with the very fabric of existence, a power that could both create and destroy. The Nightbringer staggered back, his mask of obsidian cracking, revealing glimpses of a face twisted in pain and surprise. He had underestimated her, underestimated the power of love, the strength of the human spirit, the resilience of hope.
Impossible,
he roared, his voice filled with disbelief and rage. "You cannot defeat me. I am eternal. I am darkness itself." "You are wrong," Eowyn said, her voice ringing with conviction. "Darkness can be overcome. Light can prevail. And love is the strongest force of all." She raised her hands, channeling the torrent of energy, focusing it into a single, blinding beam of light that struck the Nightbringer with the force of a supernova. He screamed, a sound of pure agony, as his shadowy form began to unravel, to dissipate, to dissolve into nothingness. The chamber shook, the mirror shattering, the vortex of darkness collapsing in on itself. The fortress began to crumble, the walls cracking, the ceiling falling, the very foundations of the Nightbringer's realm disintegrating. Eowyn stood firm, her eyes fixed on the dissipating form of the Nightbringer, her heart filled with a mixture of triumph and sorrow. She had won. She had defeated the darkness. She had saved their worlds. But the victory came at a cost. The battle had taken its toll. She was exhausted, her body battered and bruised, her spirit drained. The loss of Rorik was a gaping wound in her heart, a pain that would never fully heal. As the last vestiges of the Nightbringer's form vanished, a single tear rolled down Eowyn's cheek. It was a tear of ice, formed from the magic of the Winter Realm, but it was also a tear of fire, born from the intensity of her love, from the depth of her grief. The tear fell to the ground, landing on the shattered remnants of the mirrors. As it touched the broken glass, a wave of energy rippled outward, a surge of power that spread through the chamber, through the fortress, through the entire realm. The darkness began to recede, replaced by a faint, ethereal light. The air grew warmer, the oppressive silence broken by the sound of birdsong, of flowing water, of life returning. The shattered mirrors began to reassemble, their fragments floating in the air, merging together, forming a single, flawless surface that reflected not the darkness, but the light. Eowyn looked at the restored mirror, her reflection staring back at her. She saw not just herself, but also Rorik, standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with love and pride. She saw Lyra, the guardian of the Forgotten Kingdom, her face filled with relief and gratitude. She saw the people of Hollowmere, her friends, her neighbors, their faces filled with joy and celebration. It was a vision, a memory, a promise of a future that could have been, a future that had been stolen from them. But it was also a reminder of what she had fought for, of what she had achieved, of the love that had sustained her. She knew that Rorik was gone, that she would never see him again in this life. But she also knew that his spirit lived on, in her heart, in her memory, in the magic that flowed through her veins. She turned away from the mirror, her heart filled with a mixture of sorrow and peace. She had done what she had set out to do. She had defeated the Nightbringer. She had saved their worlds. She stepped out of the collapsing fortress, into a realm that was slowly being reborn. The darkness was gone, replaced by a soft, gentle light. The air was fresh and clean, filled with the scent of flowers, of growing things, of life renewed. She knew that she had a long journey ahead of her, a journey of healing, of rebuilding, of creating a new future for her kingdom, for her people. But she was no longer alone. She had the memory of Rorik's love to guide her, the strength of her own spirit to sustain her, the power of two worlds within her. As she walked away from the ruins of the Nightbringer's realm, tears of ice and fire still glistening on her cheeks, she looked up at the sky, at the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. It was a new day, a new beginning, a new hope. And she, Eowyn Vale, the Queen of Winter, the heart of the storm, the weapon of light, was ready to embrace it. The single tear, a symbol of loss and triumph, reflected the nascent dawn. Chapter 18. The Call of the Wild. The return to Winter's Hold was a bittersweet homecoming. The palace, once a symbol of Rorik's power and their shared love, now felt like a mausoleum, echoing with the silence of his absence. The ethereal beings who inhabited the palace greeted Eowyn with a mixture of reverence and sorrow, their pale eyes reflecting the shared grief of their kingdom. Eowyn went through the motions of ruling, attending to the needs of her people, overseeing the rebuilding of the connection between the realms, but her heart was heavy, her spirit weary. The joy of victory was overshadowed by the profound loss of Rorik, a wound that time seemed unable to heal. She found solace in the palace gardens, the place where she had first discovered her affinity for the magic of winter, where she and Rorik had shared moments of peace and connection. She used her powers to restore the frozen plants, coaxing them back to life, creating a vibrant oasis of color amidst the endless expanse of ice and snow. But even the beauty of the gardens couldn't fill the void within her. She longed for Rorik's presence, for his voice, for his touch, for his guidance. She missed their conversations, their shared laughter, their quiet moments of companionship. One evening, as she sat by the frozen pond, watching the aurora borealis dance in the sky above, she felt a strange pull, a yearning for something more, something beyond the confines of the palace, beyond the boundaries of the winter realm. It was a call, a whisper on the wind, a feeling deep within her soul. It was the call of the wild, the call of her own nature, the call of the earth that flowed through her veins. She realized that she couldn't stay in Winter's Hold, trapped in her grief, confined by the responsibilities of her crown. She needed to reconnect with her roots, with the world she had left behind, with the life she had once known. She decided to return to Hollowmere, to the village of her birth, to the place where her journey had begun. She knew that it wouldn't be easy, that she would be facing a different world, a world that had moved on without her. But she also knew that it was necessary for her own healing, for her own growth, for her own future. She announced her decision to the inhabitants of Winter's Hold, explaining her need to reconnect with her roots, to find solace in the familiar surroundings of her former life. They understood, their pale eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. They knew that she had given them everything, that she had sacrificed her own happiness for their sake. They offered her their blessings, their gratitude, their unwavering loyalty. They promised to maintain the connection between the realms, to honor Rorik's memory, to protect the kingdom he had entrusted to her. Eowyn appointed Lyra, the guardian of the Forgotten Kingdom, as her regent, trusting her to rule wisely and justly in her absence. Lyra accepted the responsibility, her eyes filled with a quiet strength, a determination to honor the trust that Eowyn had placed in her. The journey back to Hollowmere was a strange and surreal experience. The portal between the realms, once a gateway to darkness, now shimmered with a soft, gentle light, a testament to the victory that Eowyn had achieved. She stepped through the portal, leaving behind the ethereal beauty of the Winter Realm, returning to the familiar sights and sounds of her former life. She found herself standing on the edge of the frozen lake, the same lake where she had first encountered Rorik, where her destiny had been revealed. But the lake was no longer frozen. It was thawed, its waters shimmering in the sunlight, reflecting the clear blue sky. The village of Hollowmere looked different, changed, yet somehow the same. The buildings were familiar, the streets were recognizable, but there was a sense of renewal, of rebirth, of a new beginning. She walked towards the village, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with 1,000 questions, 1,000 uncertainties. She wondered how the villagers would react to her return, whether they would remember her, whether they would accept her. As she entered the village square, she saw a group of people gathered, their faces turned towards her, their eyes filled with a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and recognition. Old Maggie, the village seer, stepped forward, her milky eyes widening, a smile spreading across her wrinkled face. "Eowyn," she croaked, her voice filled with emotion. "You've returned." The villagers murmured amongst themselves, their voices hushed and reverent. They remembered her, the apothecary, the widow, the woman who had disappeared into the winter storm. They had heard the tales, the whispers of her adventures, of her victory over the darkness, of her transformation into the Queen of Winter. They welcomed her back, not with fear or suspicion, but with open arms, with gratitude, with respect. They had seen the change in the seasons, the return of the warmth, the blossoming of the flowers, the abundance of the harvest. They knew that she was the one who had brought them this blessing, that she was the one who had saved them from the eternal winter. Eowyn felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a sense of belonging, of homecoming, of a connection to the earth, to her people, to her roots. She had returned, not as the Queen of Winter, but as Eowyn Vale, the woman she had always been, the woman she was always meant to be. The call of the wild had led her home. Chapter 19. The Queen's Resolve. The return to Hollowmere was a balm for Eowyn's wounded soul. The familiar sights, sounds, and scents of the village, the warmth of the sun on her skin, the laughter of the children playing in the square, all helped to ease the ache of Rorik's absence, to fill the void within her. She settled back into her old cottage, the small, humble dwelling that had once been her haven, her sanctuary. She reopened her apothecary, the Whispering Willow, its shelves once again lined with jars of dried herbs, colorful powders, and tinctures. The villagers welcomed her back with open arms, their hearts filled with gratitude for the woman who had saved them from the eternal winter. They came to her for healing, for advice, for comfort, their trust in her unwavering. Eowyn found solace in her work, in the familiar rhythm of her days, in the connection she felt to the earth, to the plants, to the healing power of nature. She tended to her garden, coaxing the herbs and flowers back to life, creating a vibrant oasis of color and fragrance behind her cottage. But she was not the same woman who had left Hollowmere. The experiences she had endured, the battles she had fought, the love she had shared with Rorik, had changed her, transformed her, made her stronger, wiser, more compassionate. She carried the weight of two worlds on her shoulders, the responsibility of maintaining the balance between the realms, of protecting both her people and the inhabitants of Winter's Hold. She kept in contact with Lyra, her regent, exchanging messages through the portal, offering guidance, receiving updates, ensuring the continued stability of the Winter Kingdom. She also discovered that her magic had not diminished with her return to the mortal realm. It was still there, a part of her, a connection to the power of winter, a reminder of her destiny. She used her magic discreetly, subtly, to help the villagers, to heal their ailments, to protect them from harm, to enhance the growth of their crops. She became known as the Winter's Blessing, a figure of hope, of healing, of protection. But she knew that her time in Hollowmere was temporary, a respite, a period of healing and reflection. She had a duty, a responsibility, to the Winter Realm, to the kingdom that Rorik had entrusted to her. One evening, as she sat by the fire in her cottage, watching the flames dance and flicker, she made a decision. She would return to Winter's Hold, not as a grieving widow, but as a queen, as a ruler, as a protector of both realms. She would honor Rorik's memory by continuing his work, by maintaining the balance between the worlds, by ensuring the safety and prosperity of her people. She would rule with wisdom, with compassion, with strength, guided by the love she had shared with him, by the lessons she had learned, by the power she now possessed. She would not forget Hollowmere, her roots, her home. She would return often, to visit her friends, to tend to her garden, to reconnect with the earth that had nurtured her. But her destiny lay in Winter's Hold, in the realm of ice and snow, in the kingdom that had become a part of her. She announced her decision to the villagers, explaining her need to return to her duties, to fulfill her responsibilities, to honor Rorik's memory. They understood, their hearts filled with a mixture of sadness and pride. They knew that she was more than just the village apothecary, that she was a queen, a protector, a beacon of hope. They offered her their blessings, their gratitude, their unwavering support. They promised to maintain the connection between the realms, to honor the memory of the Frostborn King, to protect the village he had once safeguarded. Eowyn prepared for her departure, gathering her belongings, saying her farewells, her heart filled with a mixture of sorrow and anticipation. She knew that she was leaving a part of herself behind, but she also knew that she was returning to a place where she belonged, to a kingdom that needed her, to a destiny that awaited her. As she stood at the edge of the village, ready to step back through the portal, she looked back at Hollowmere, at the familiar cottages, at the faces of her friends, at the landscape that had shaped her. She smiled, a faint, bittersweet smile, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and resolve. She had come home. She had healed. She had found her strength. And now, she was ready to return to her kingdom, to embrace her destiny, to rule with wisdom, with compassion, with love. The queen's resolve was firm, her heart steadfast, her spirit unwavering. She was ready to face the future, whatever it may hold. Chapter 20. The Final Frost. The return to Winter's Hold was a triumphant one. The ethereal beings who inhabited the palace greeted Eowyn with joyous cries, their pale eyes shining with relief and gratitude. They had missed their queen, their protector, their beacon of hope. Lyra, her regent, stepped forward, her face filled with a mixture of respect and affection. "Welcome back, Your Majesty," she said, her voice sincere. "We are overjoyed to have you home." Eowyn smiled, her heart warmed by their welcome. "Thank you, Lyra," she said. "It is good to be back." She surveyed the palace, the familiar halls, the shimmering ice sculptures, the ethereal gardens. It felt like coming home, a place of belonging, a place of power, a place of responsibility. She resumed her duties as queen, ruling with wisdom and compassion, guided by the memory of Rorik, by the lessons she had learned, by the power she now possessed. She strengthened the connection between the realms, ensuring the continued flow of magic, the balance between winter and warmth. She worked closely with Lyra, sharing her knowledge, her experience, her vision for the future. They became a formidable team, their strengths complementing each other, their bond of friendship and respect unwavering. Eowyn also continued to develop her magic, honing her skills, exploring new possibilities, pushing the boundaries of her power. She discovered that she could communicate with the creatures of the Winter Realm, understanding their needs, their fears, their desires. She became a bridge between the human and the animal worlds, a protector of all living things. But the peace she had fought so hard to achieve was not destined to last. The forces of darkness, though defeated, were not extinguished. They lingered in the shadows, biding their time, waiting for an opportunity to strike again. A new threat emerged, a remnant of the Nightbringer's power, a creature of shadow and ice that called itself the Frost Shade. It sought to reclaim the winter realm, to plunge it back into eternal darkness, to extinguish the light that Eowyn had brought. The frost shade began to attack the outlying settlements of Winter's Hold, draining the life force from the land, turning the ice and snow into a barren wasteland. The ethereal beings fought back, but they were no match for the creature's power. Eowyn knew that she had to confront the frost shade, to protect her kingdom, to defend her people. She prepared for battle, gathering her allies, honing her magic, steeling her resolve. She sought guidance from the ancient texts, from the spirits of the past, from the memory of Rorik. She discovered that the frost shade could only be defeated by a weapon of pure light, a force that combined the magic of winter with the warmth of the sun, with the power of love. She realized that she was the only one who could wield such a weapon, that she was the only one who could defeat the frost shade. She had the magic of winter within her, the connection to the earth, the love for Rorik and her people, the strength of two worlds. She journeyed to the place where the frost shade had last been seen, a desolate, frozen wasteland where the very air crackled with dark energy. She found the creature waiting for her, its form a swirling vortex of shadow and ice, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. So, the Queen of Winter returns, the frost shade hissed, its voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the wasteland. I have been waiting for you. I am here to end you, frost shade, Eowyn said, her voice firm and unwavering. To protect my kingdom, to defend my people. You cannot defeat me, the frost shade sneered. I am the darkness. I am the cold. I am eternal. You are wrong, Eowyn said, her voice ringing with defiance. Darkness can be overcome. Cold can be thawed. And love is the strongest force of all. She raised her hands, channeling her magic, drawing on the power of winter, on the warmth of the sun, on the strength of her love. She created a weapon of pure light, a blinding beam of energy that shot towards the frost shade, striking it with the force of 1,000 storms. The frost shade screamed, a sound of pure agony, as its shadowy form began to unravel, to dissipate, to dissolve into nothingness. The wasteland around them began to thaw, the ice melting, the snow receding, the first signs of life returning. Eowyn stood firm, her eyes fixed on the dissipating form of the frost shade, her heart filled with a mixture of triumph and relief. She had done it. She had defeated the darkness, again. She had protected her kingdom. She had defended her people. As the last vestiges of the frost shade vanished, a single snowflake fell from the sky, landing on Eowyn's outstretched hand. It was a perfect snowflake, a symbol of winter, of beauty, of resilience. But it was also a snowflake that shimmered with a faint, golden light, a symbol of warmth, of hope, of a new beginning. The final frost had come and gone, and in its wake, the promise of spring remained. Eowyn, the Queen of Winter, the heart of the storm, the weapon of light, had brought balance back to her world. Epilogue. Years passed and the realms flourished. The bond between Winter's Hold and Hollowmere, once fragile and threatened, grew stronger than ever before. Eowyn, wise and compassionate, ruled over both with a gentle hand and an unwavering spirit. She divided her time between the two worlds, ensuring the prosperity and harmony of each. The memory of Rorik never faded. He remained a constant presence in her heart, a guiding star in her decisions, a source of strength in times of challenge. She often visited the frozen lake, their first meeting place, now a symbol of enduring love and sacrifice. She would stand on its shores, the wind whispering his name, and feel his presence beside her, a silent promise of a reunion beyond the veil of mortality. Lyra proved to be a steadfast ally and friend, her wisdom and strength invaluable in governing Winter's Hold. The ethereal beings thrived under their combined leadership, their magic flourishing, their connection to the mortal realm deepening. Hollowmere, too, prospered. The village became a beacon of hope and healing, known throughout the land for its wise woman, the Winter's Blessing, who possessed the power to heal both body and soul. Eowyn's apothecary, the Whispering Willow, became a place of pilgrimage, drawing people from far and wide seeking her remedies and her counsel. The seasons continued their dance, winter giving way to spring, spring to summer, summer to autumn, and autumn back to winter. But the harshness of the old winters was gone, replaced by a gentler cold, a season of beauty and rest, a reminder of the balance that Éowyn had achieved. One crisp winter evening, many years after the defeat of the Frostshade, Éowyn, now silver-haired but still radiating an inner strength and beauty, stood on the balcony of Winter's Hold, overlooking the snow-covered landscape. The aurora borealis danced in the sky above, a breathtaking display of color and light, a celestial celebration of a life well lived. She felt a familiar presence beside her, a warmth that chased away the chill of the night. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. It was the feeling of Rorik, his love, his spirit, his enduring presence. She smiled, a faint, bittersweet smile, her eyes filled with a mixture of peace and longing. She knew that her time was drawing near, that she would soon be joining him, crossing the veil that separated the living from the dead. She had lived a long and full life, a life filled with adventure, with challenge, with love, with loss, with triumph. She had faced her fears, she had embraced her destiny, she had saved 2 worlds. She had no regrets. As the aurora borealis reached its peak, painting the sky with 1,000 shimmering colors, Éowyn closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let go. She felt herself falling, floating, drifting towards the light. She saw Rorik waiting for her, his hand outstretched, his eyes filled with love and welcome. She reached for him, her fingers intertwining with his, their bond reunited, their love eternal. They walked together, hand in hand, into the light, into the next adventure, into the realm beyond the veil, where winter and spring met, where darkness and light danced, where love never ended. The snow fell softly, silently, covering the land in a blanket of peace. And the wind whispered a final farewell, a promise of remembrance, a legend of the queen who had saved 2 worlds and found her love in the heart of the storm.